Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Hard Histories conversation, and we're just waiting for everyone to enter the Zoom meeting, so we'll start our program in a minute. Alrighty, so it looks like we're ready to get started. So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our Hard Histories conversation. My name is Annabelle Headley, and I'm a senior at JHU, and I am a double major in biology and medicine science humanities, or MSH for short. And over the summer, I had the wonderful opportunity to work with Professor Martha Jones and as a research assistant, and this web event marks my start with the Hard Histories Project. And that is the perfect segue into introducing Hard Histories. So launched in the fall of 2020, the Hard Histories at Hopkins project examines the role that racism and discrimination have played at Johns Hopkins. Blending research, teaching, public engagement, and creative arts, Hard Histories aims to engage our broadest communities, both at Hopkins and in Baltimore, in a frank and informed exploration of the myths that have become part of our university story, and to offer evidence of how race and racism have shaped Johns Hopkins. In fall 2022, we are hosting a series of conversations exploring the histories of Blackness, slavery, and racism in the Maryland area and beyond. Today, we are excited to host a discussion about the relaunch of the Baltimore news publication, the Baltimore Beat. According to its website, the Baltimore Beat is a Black-led, Black-controlled nonprofit newspaper and media outlet, helmed by editor-in-chief Lisa Snowden, and the Baltimore-based Lillian Holofcener Charitable Foundation divested itself fully of its funds in order to contribute to the August 2022 restart of the Beat. We invite our panelists now to turn their cameras on. So we are honored to have with us today Lisa Snowden and Adam Holofcener in discussion with Hard Histories Project Director, Dr. Martha S. Jones. Lisa Snowden is editor-in-chief and co-founder of Baltimore Beat. Previously, she was an editor at Baltimore City Paper, Baltimore Sun, and the Real News Network. Her work has also appeared in Essence, Washington Post, Baltimore Magazine, and many other publications. Adam Holofcener, Esquire, is the executive director of Maryland Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts, a Baltimore-based nonprofit organization that provides access to pro bono legal services to artists and creatives throughout the state. In May 2020, Adam joined the board of the Lillian Holofcener Charitable Foundation and spearheaded an initiative to divest over 90% of the fund's assets by giving Baltimore Beat a no-strings-attached capitalization grant. And finally, Dr. Martha S. Jones is the Society of Black Alumni Presidential Professor, a professor of history, and a professor at the SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Jones, Lisa Snowden, and Adam Holofcener will be in conversation for about 25 minutes, and then we'll turn to your questions. Please submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function. Finally, live captioning is available to our audience members within Zoom. We are also posting a link in the chat to the live transcript URL for those who prefer to access captions that way. Thank you both for being here, and I will now turn the conversation over to Dr. Jones and see you all at the end of the discussion.
Thanks so much, Annabelle. And I want to just extend a special welcome to Annabelle Headley, who, as she said, has just joined us at Hard Histories. We're thrilled to have you working with us and look forward to a really remarkable year. Before we get started, I want to say a little bit about this year, because for those of you who have been following us and attending these webinars, you'll see, I think, some changes in 2022-23. And those changes really reflect some of what we're learning at Hard Histories through our work at Johns Hopkins. Most importantly, what we've come to understand are the many ways and in the many spaces in which throughout Baltimore City, folks are have heeded and taken seriously the calls for racial justice and reckoning that we all remember from the summer of 2020. And we have had the extraordinary opportunity of collaborating and consulting and linking arms with schools, educational institutions, museums, historical societies, cultural institutions. And all of that has really inspired us and informed our work importantly. So this year, you will find us featuring some of these important connections. You might say this is a year for making good on the somewhat threadbare adage that the sum is great. How does it go, right? The sum is greater than the whole of the parts. That we really are at work, in our view, on things that are incredibly important for the city of Baltimore, and we're extraordinarily honored to play a small part in that. So stay tuned. There'll be more, but today we have this remarkable opportunity to feature the Baltimore Beat. We've talked about media and journalism before in this series. We've had, for example, with us, Savannah Wood from the foundation that has grown out of the Baltimore Afro and learned so much about, yes, journalism past, journalism present, but the role of the archive and the ways in which that historical archive can be linked to creative projects in the arts. We followed last February when the Baltimore Sun issued, I had to write it down, a expressed deep and profound sorrow for the role it had played in the oppression of Black Americans in Maryland. I guess that's a story still being written, and we follow that. But when we began to follow the relaunch, the reemergence of the Baltimore Beat, it quickly became clear that it was a story we wanted to really dive deep into. Not only has the Beat in these really relatively short months answered a question about how journalists, how media can shape the future of our city, you all have really, at the Beat, spoken to a question that often comes up during our Hard Histories conversations, which is, what does it look like when we get beyond the reckoning? What does it look like when reparations become real? How do we know when we are really part of change that is transformative? And for us, the Beat has really been a beacon in that regard. And so it's so incredibly exciting for us to have you all here. And I hope it won't surprise you. I'm going to start by asking you to tell us a little bit of history. We're interested in that. But I really wanted folks to hear from each of you some of how you would explain arriving at that moment when it is clear that the Beat is going to relaunch in this collaboration, if I could put it that way, between, on the one hand, a philanthropic enterprise and a longstanding vision for a new independent weekly in Baltimore. So maybe, Lisa, I could ask you to get us started. Your bio tells like a sketch of how we got from here to there, but I wonder sort of how you would sort of begin to write the history that gets us to the launch of the Beat in the summer of 2020. And then I'll come to Adam.
Sure. Well, the Beat actually began back in 2016. I had been hired about a year and a half or 2 years before that at Baltimore City Paper, which was about a 40-year-old alt weekly here in Baltimore City. It was kind of the companion to news like the Baltimore Sun, because whereas the Sun is able to kind of send reporters out and cover the things that happen on a daily basis, City Paper and alt weeklies in general kind of take a step back and say, what does this mean? And not only do they take a step back, but sometimes it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek taking a step back. So maybe it's poking fun at the mayor, or calling BS on some speech that a city council person makes. And they hired me as some work that they were doing internally after the uprising that happened after Freddie Gray's death, because the reporters there cared very deeply about what the conditions that led to his death and the city's reaction to it. But they also were looking at each other and saying, we're all like white people. So they knew that they needed to add more Black people to the staff. They brought me on, they brought on another Black photographer, and they also made a more concerted effort to bringing on more Black freelancers and contributors. So the Sun closed City Paper, as many here in Baltimore knew would eventually happen, because it's just one less way of having competition in a very small market. And I went to actually work for the Sun on their editorial board. While this is happening, Brandon Soderbergh, who was the editor-in-chief of the City Paper at that point, was working to kind of keep City Paper going. He had people that wanted to buy it. The Sun would not sell it. He was eventually approached by someone here in Baltimore who runs a paper in DC, but who saw the value of the paper here in Baltimore. They got together and cooked up the Beat, and Brandon asked me to be the editor-in-chief. I was terrified because I was like, what? I never imagined myself being, someone directing or running things at a paper. I thought my job was always going to be kind of like to write my stories and go home. So I thought about it a while, and I was like, there's no way, like, I can't turn down this opportunity, like, as a Black woman. There's no way that I can do that. I owe it to myself, and I owe it to other Black people to create new lanes of opportunity and, things that you can aspire to as a Black person. So we launched it. It ran for about 5 months, and our publishers at the time said that, sorry, we can't do it anymore. It's just not making money the way that we thought it would, and pulled out. Brandon and I are both very stubborn people. So we basically were like, okay, well, we're still doing this. And so we relaunched the Beat about a year later as a nonprofit. We had people that contributed through a Patreon, and all of our content was online at that point. A little bit before the pandemic hit, life happened for Brandon and I. Brandon wrote a book about the Gun Trade Task Force, which is like a group of crooked cops in Baltimore that were robbing citizens. I had stuff going on too, so we kind of put it in a hiatus, but both knew like this wasn't the end. And one day Brandon called me and was like, I have something to tell you, and this sounds crazy, but it's really not crazy. We have the opportunity to have $1 million from Adam. And so Adam was somebody that I knew, I would see him out around Baltimore, just the way that I would see you, Martha, because Baltimore is a very small city. But I never knew that he even had access to $1 million. I'm like, white people just tap into money just casually? Because it wasn't like Adam was walking around looking like, Mr. Moneybucks or anything. But yeah, I was like, okay. And that began kind of a year of conversation to figure out how this would happen, because I think that we came to the agreement that it had to be no strings attached. So what did that mean? What did it look like? Making sure that Adam and his family trusted Brandon and I, and vice versa, really. And that's kind of what led us up to this moment on August 10th, where we were able to relaunch with a really nice website and also a print paper that we could distribute through the city for people who don't always have the best internet access.
It's really wonderful because partly it's a story about it's about the ashes, right? You know, it's about the ending of thing and the rebirth of things. And so let me ask Adam, I guess, a version of the same question, Adam, because I'm assuming, you know, you're watching what Lisa's describing unfold, sitting nearby, sitting adjacent, but also sitting within your family foundation. How would you explain the history as we begin to write it of this, you know, remarkable rebirth in summer of 2022?
Dr. Jones, thank you for you and your team for having me, and Lisa, who I consider a good friend and colleague. I'm very happy to be here with you. I really appreciate this opportunity because I think a lot of what we're teasing out is the beat is a feel-good story at this point, where people who were meant to do certain important work, who weren't given that opportunity, given the sort of systemic injustices that are part and parcel of the way that we operate as a community and as a culture, don't make that possible. And like you said, we're getting past a reckoning in a very specific, discrete sense. For me, though, the process has been an ongoing thing really throughout my entire career, in terms of trying to figure out how I, as a white person, can actually play a role in something as transformative as this, right? And I think Lisa set me up pretty well when she was like, I didn't even know Adam had access to this kind of money, right? To this kind of transformative wealth redistribution opportunity. And actually, I didn't know I had that access either, because even though myself, I think like so many other white and privileged people have proximity to wealth, the control and the agency that we have related to that is generally not as forthcoming or available, right? The Lillian Holofcener Foundation had basically been in existence for the past 15 years. My biological paternal grandfather, it was money that was passed on after he died. He being someone I didn't know, him having chosen to not really have a connection with our family. And of the Holofcener family, I'm the only one, the entirety of my career, both before and after I became an attorney, has been in the public interest and been in the public sector. So I'm the only one who's had proximity to philanthropy in a professional context, to the nonprofit industrial complex. So while I knew that this foundation, which I did not run, which I was not the executor, steward, or board member of up until very recently, I was always trying to determine how I could potentially influence what was going on with that, which was being run by older members of my family, given the information that I knew, but given the proximity I had as a family member, but the wide ideological gap between me and my other family members in terms of how to think about the world we're living in and how to potentially engage and change. So I am thrilled beyond thrilled that we're here at this moment, but as Lisa mentioned, this wasn't something where it was like, hey, I just decided let's, hey family, let's give $1 million to the Beat. And then the next day they cut a check. So I will say my heart rate just started to go down from when the money actually hit the Beat's bank account. Because this was as I'm happy to talk about further, but I'm going to stop speaking in a second. It's complicated to have a group of people try and effectuate anything, let alone something as unique as this, especially in the philanthropic sphere.
Well, I mean, that's exactly where I hoped we could go. So thank you for the setup. I think I do want to ask you first, Adam, so what are those conversations like? Because I think that it's a question many of us have, right? About how do we work across difference of experience, of ideology, of worldview, experience, and more. And I think what I hear you describing is even within a family, right? Within a structure like a family foundation, there is work to do to bring folks to the same page about the future. And in your case, to do something, if I'm understanding right, something unprecedented, right? Which is to make this large capital gift rather than sort of small incremental distributions.
Well, I'd say at the end, my Monday morning quarterbacking, as I try and think about how I can provide tools to other people who are in this position, and to shout out organizations like Resource Generation, there are people who are thinking about, well, how do we do this, right? And it's sort of this like interfamily political and psychological process, right? That's as much empathy as it is education, as it is Machiavellian playbook, right? And I think that where I started, especially feeling like I didn't have any role models or mentors to look up to necessarily in terms of making this kind of project successful, I was trying to sort of be my own consultant and empathize as much as possible with both sides. I mean, one thing which we'll also talk about is I was extremely sensitive to Lisa's position, especially being one who had already made a big sacrifice and a big decision in terms of leaving the Sun to start Baltimore Beat 1.0, which suffered because a lack of ownership and equity, and that put Lisa in a very difficult position. And I was sensitive that any proposal I meant and any interactions that I had were going to involve my influence and my own ostensible statecraft and my own power wielding. And then on the other side, I was trying to speak to my family that had no baseline understanding of the nonprofit industrial complex in terms of racialized capitalism, in terms of any of those forces, both unconscious and conscious, that were going to affect how they understood a proposal in this way. So I started out by having, I was capitalizing for anyone who's read Naomi Klein's book Shock Doctrine. I knew that all of my efforts to influence the foundation had primarily not been heeded in a meaningful way up until the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd. And I understood that was a moment in a shock doctrine sense to capitalize on my white family members feeling that discomfort that most white people see when they have, white supremacy play out in its most extravagant ways. And so in trying to say, okay, we can maybe do something about this collectively, I was able to get some other members of my family to engage in this issue. We read Decolonizing Wealth, a book by Edgar Villanueva, philanthropic professional, trying to think about how philanthropies generally operate. I completed an audit, both programmatic and financial, of the foundation over the past 15 years to be like, here's how it's been operating. Not trying to blame anybody, especially given their lack of professional development in this area, but here's what's been happening literally. And given what we've been reading, how we've been thinking about things and where the world is right now. And I was also able to speak as a nonprofit professional who saw no foundations open up their principal, open up their capital that they were trying to expend. All of the most, things that when I look at some of these philanthropies with whom I work, I'll never be able to unsee, right? During one of the most destabilized times of my life, no one changed their behavior fundamentally. I was trying to sort of nurture us to say, how can we think differently? I think that was difficult because it was difficult for me to not come off as somewhat paternalistic or condescending on any side of anything, even though I was trying to bridge the gaps as much as humanly possible, try and take myself out of the position while offering alternatives. And then when it seemed like I had my family on board to a certain extent, because I'd given them some other proposals too, in terms of large scale divestment, and they were most excited about the Beat, is when I got the Beat, Brandon and Lisa, involved. And then also that's where things got tricky, because I think I naively assumed that once we had done about 6 months of work as a family and we got the Beat involved, a check would be cut and that would be that. And it wasn't that simple.
I mean, that's a perfect segue to Lisa, because I mean, I think one of the things I know, Lisa, is that throughout this, you have developed a very powerful and specific philosophy, approach, vision for the Beat, whether it's the importance of it being Black-led, or the importance of producing a actual physical newspaper that will circulate in the ways that only newspapers do. You have all this, I think, in many ways worked out by the time you're now going to speak with Adam and with the foundation. So what questions did you have for them about, and what did you need to know in order to agree to link your vision, in a sense, to folks who are coming to it, if I could say, unschooled or naive, or at least not experienced?
I mean, a lot of those conversations I was kept out of. Like, I'm learning about them now. I think for the reasons that Adam said, because he kind of didn't want to burden me with that stuff. But what I knew walking away from the first version of the Beat is that it had to be, and also just watching some other publications around the country kind of rise and fall, is that the money had to be no strings attached. That I knew. I knew always that the Beat was going to be a thing, and I knew always that I was going to run it. I did not know that Adam's family was going to reach out, Adam through his family was going to reach out to me like that. But I knew that when I did have, however way I brought it, it could not be a thing where I'm going and sitting down in front of a powerful person and, doing the song and dance and getting a little bit more money, because that just, it hurts the journalism, even with white publication, even with mainstream publications, but especially for the kind of work that I'm doing that is specific and really focused on meeting the needs of Black people. And as a Black woman myself, I would be doing everything a disservice if I allowed that to happen. Now, I think there's one thing to kind of really say before we go, I know we're going to go to the question and answer soon, is like, none of this work is done. There is not a reckoning that has really even happened. Like, I don't think I'll see a reckoning of any kind in my lifetime, because basically it means that we hit phases and then different things happen. So right now, even with Adam and I have a great relationship, but we will have hard conversations still moving forward, because even though he doesn't have actual control over this money, there's still kind of the psychic tie of the fact that this money came from him. So there's that. There's the way that my team, we're all, I have J. Brian Charles as our deputy editor, he's Black. Our arts and culture editor, Terry Henderson, they're both amazing and gifted writers. All of us have had to kind of do this process of decolonizing our own brains and writing styles, because journalism is very, very white. And so we were been brought up into this pipeline that, like, our work has been approved by white people for all of our careers. And so this is just really like the next phase of conversations. What does it mean? Adam's family gave me a good start, but I'm still now going to have to go and keep making money. So how do I maintain that integrity? So all of that is still more work that is to be done, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that, and I've heard you talk about, right, that there are these the question of how do you sustain, right? And there are those of us who are going to subscribe, and perhaps there are those of us who are going to open our foundations and our pocketbooks and more, and to make that happen. But I want to just drill in a little bit with you, if I could, about your philosophy for this paper, because I think there's a way in which you are, I hear you, right? We're not there, but part of, I think what you've offered us is a model, a strategy, right? A set of principles, right? For so how we go forward, by way of another kind of configuration, by a different set of relationships, if I could use the word power even, right? A different set of power relations. So can we just drill in a little bit, and you could say a little bit about sort of where the principles are, and now imagining yourself talking to those folks who themselves, right, are seeing the need for alternative, independent, Black-led, et cetera, news in their communities. Yeah, just unpack some of that for us.
I mean, there's a way that journalism is a conversation between powerful people. So, you can see sometimes journalists and politicians hanging out, or maybe politicians going to visit journalism offices. And so like these two entities that are kind of at the top of the totem pole or the power structure are having this conversation and speaking the same language and agreeing on this information. And you're totally missing most of the other people in the conversation. So I really wanted, one of the things that we talked about with, when we were preparing to launch the Beat with the team that I have now, was like, who is our audience? And one of the things that we landed on is if we are thinking about the people with the least amount of power, then everybody's served. Because it really like goes up, because then like they know, they have their needs addressed, but then also other people who maybe aren't dealing with those specific needs understand that those needs exist and can take their power and make those things better. It's interesting, even with the Beat, like our language has very much been like black be, or black be black, but like it has been embraced by so many people who are not Black and still care about it and still look forward to Wednesdays when it comes out. And I think that's one way of just showing that, like that, I think that's a method that could work.
One of the things that surprised me in the best way, and I wanted to ask you both about this, is so this, Lisa, that I follow you devotedly on Twitter, and other folks should too. You could drop your handle in the chat for folks who want to follow you on the socials. But so I know you best as a commentator on mostly city politics, right, and Maryland politics, and so that has been important for me and has informed me a lot. And so I think what I didn't expect was how importantly the arts would figure in the Beat, and I want to ask Adam to come in on this too, because I know that his work with the volunteer lawyers for the arts in Maryland is also sort of that bridge between legal practice and the arts. And I think there's something in this project for me that is thinking about, if you will, the politics of the arts, right? And the power of the arts that sometimes can be, I don't know, elided and overlooked as we focus on Annapolis and City Hall and all the things that we must focus on. Maybe I'll ask you that, and then I'll ask Adam to come in and say something about the politics and the power of the arts, and in particular in this moment in Baltimore. Adam, you want to come in and then?
Sure, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, again, I'm one of these people where other than my family, right? Art is the most, like, the reason for living for me. The creative, because the best part about being human is seeing what other people make and create. It's what makes me happy to wake up. But so I'm one of those people, though, where the term art is somewhat, not somewhat, to me it's meaningless, and it obfuscates what's going on. I've been for a long time the type of person where every act is a political act, right? And I think that just in the same way that we have these arbitrary constructs in order to control, like race, art, the term art in itself is a false construct, right? The way that we work at Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts is, if you do anything that you self-ascribe as having creative potential to how you make meaning, then you are a constituent of ours. And again, a little funny story, right, is when the Beat version 1.0 was going through its own meltdown originally, it was myself and one of my colleagues at Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts that helped the Beat retain its intellectual property so that they could then start up again with agency and self-ownership later on, because we've considered, whether it's the literary arts, maker arts, creative arts, in any capacity, especially when you look at a place like Baltimore that really doesn't have neither blue collar nor white collar industries any longer. It boils down how the only economies that we really have happening when you look at the large scale population are creative, small entrepreneurial pursuits. And it's basically hard to not find some creative aspect in what pretty much everybody in this city does. And then it helps to blow apart this term art with a capital A that generally has, been not for anybody else. And so, no, I just think it's actually what is the great equalizer, even though the term itself has been used to separate people.
Thank you. Lisa?
I mean, for me, there's a few things happening. Number one, there's no way of being a Black artist and having your work not be political. That's just, your body is political. I think also it's as important, to be able to write down what a protester is saying in front of City Hall as to document the way that a painter or a collagist or a playwright is documenting what's happening in life. Both of those are reflections of what the world that we're living in. I also just wanted to create multiple entry points into the paper, because I know that sometimes people aren't going to want to sit down and, go through a 2,000-word piece on legislative ideas, even though they're important. But maybe sometimes art is a little bit more accessible to folks. It seems like a little more fun. And it's always important for me to weave fun throughout everything, because otherwise nobody's looking at any of this. I'm doing it for nothing.
Well, one of the words I've heard you use about the paper is joy. Mm-hmm. I think of beauty comes to mind for me, and the photography in particular already in these early issues is so striking and so feels so essential to the project. We were talking before we went live about choosing the cover on any given issue. There is something, again, that I think is often overlooked, right, which is the possibility for our city, for beauty, for joy, for yes, the creativity for those of you, right, who carry those gifts and work through them. But I think even for civilians like me, that piece of it has been really strong. I mean, so are you feeling the joy? I mean, because I know you're working very hard at this juncture. I followed, the launch party and, some of that, but now you're in the trenches. And so how are you doing in the trenches day to day?
Oh, I am in the trenches. I am in the trenches, but it feels really good. In this issue, we have a photo set we sent our photographers, Sean Champion and Cameron Snell, out to a house music festival. So it's like, there's not even very many words. It's just sitting back and being like, these are Black people having fun. And that's enough. You mentioned Savannah Wood and the amazing work that she's doing at the Afro Charities. There's no way that I'm even attempting to set this aside over 100 years of documenting that they've done, but it's good to be able to have, I feel really honored and lucky to be able to have a small piece of starting to document other little slices of Black life that are not just like, here's Baltimore and everyone's miserable. I also am really excited about our tarot scope that we have in this piece. One of the things that I've seen over the past few years, I think also kind of as a response to the pandemic and the racial kind of conversations happening, is I've seen a lot of Black people turn to a spirituality that is not like white and Christian centered. And so we have the horoscopes that have always been a thing in newspapers, but we take tarot scopes. We have a Black woman who reads the cards from that perspective, from a Black spiritual perspective. And so seeing people and like thinking that people were going to respond to that in a positive way, and then seeing it happen when we released the paper was a really good thing. So that's joy. And then also sometimes I just have to walk away from it. And it's very hard to do that, but I have to go for a walk, or I have to take a nap, or I have to do that. And I have to find other ways so that this doesn't just completely burn me out.
Thanks for acknowledging the need for our own care for ourselves, even in the work, even when it's exciting and it's urgent. I want to turn to the Q&A, and the first question I have here really asks you all to, if you would, have a critical look at us at Johns Hopkins. The question goes, do you have suggestions about how institutions like Hopkins could contribute to or collaborate with the Beat on reparations for Black Baltimore? That's a big question, but I wanted to open up some space for you to talk about how you see us. I think on many days, my experience is folks would like Hopkins to get out of the way and to step out of the center of things and to let projects like the Beat take shape and to flourish without us. So I'm not here to persuade you otherwise. But I think that part of what this conversation and conversations like it have opened up, within our community for our students in particular is an important and a pronounced question mark about who we are in relationship to you all's work. So maybe, Adam, is that a fair question for you? And then I'll come to Lisa.
Oh, now we're speaking my language. I'm gonna roll my sleeves up here. Dr. I appreciate. Well, again, I've been thinking really hard about wealth redistribution, especially, institutions of power. I mean, for example, right, the institute that's holding this right now is named after Stavros Niarchos, who was an individual who worked with the CIA in order to have their business competitors in a geopolitical sense killed so that they could continue to make scores of money that now his descendants are parsing about. And so, one of the things that we looked at was, or I looked at in trying to reframe our foundation, is my biological grandfather, he made his money primarily from doing insurance as well as running, a ski and tennis retail store in Baltimore County, right? So taking the excess monies that were available from white individuals primarily in the Baltimore County area, and then thrusting that money, which should have never been taken through all of our, systemic ways of whether it's white flight or block busting or the participation in a redlined housing economy, and putting it back in. And so, the thing with Johns Hopkins is Johns Hopkins, the city's largest private employer, right? That also doesn't have to pay the same taxes that other employers have given their nonprofit status. The ways that they could fundamentally look at how they benefit from the structures, not just of the past, but of absolutely today. It would be, again, it would take dozens of employees to start saying, how do we start to draw these lines? And that's really what I see your program really doing, right? The hard history within and without is to say, we can document this, and then therefore we can go and figure out ways that we can redistribute equitably to our folks, right? And generally institutions, especially employers, they're not set up to think about, how do we provide equity to the people who work for us? How do we not oppress the people that work for us? How do we redistribute our coffers, right? Especially whether it's endowments or otherwise. Our systems just aren't set up for that. So anyone who is here to think seriously about that, my services are very available to have those conversations. I think one of the things, just to caveat, that I've seen a lot is I've been brought on by folks even recently, like the Baltimore Museum of Art or other institutions that are interested in trying to say, how do we move past the colonialist mindsets that we have? And then usually when I'm telling them, well, A plus B equals C, here's how we start slicing and dicing the budget, et cetera, the conversation ends and the work can't continue. So I think that having the opportunity to even just spell out some of these things is really, really helpful to reinforce those who have power within an organization to keep advocating.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that the story of the your family foundation and the Beat really resonated with us is that we have wrestled in our lab with that founding story that is often told about Johns Hopkins. And it is importantly a story about a brand of philanthropy, right? It is about Mr. Hopkins at the end of his life with a vision and his largesse, creating institutions. And we oftentimes foreground that story, thinking that it gives us a kind of shine, right? It gives us a kind of foundation from which, we can only do better things. But we don't always tell that story in a way that leaves room for critical thinking about the shortcomings and the downsides of that style of philanthropy, right? Mr. Hopkins doesn't invite, to borrow his language, poor colored people from Baltimore to advise or take a role or be decision makers in that hospital or the university. And so your story helps us, I think, rethink some of the tenor, right, that we bring to that when we tell that story. And that's, I think, incredibly important for us. I also think you and I are talking to some of the same people behind the scenes, right, about how to approach their work, their institutions, their futures differently. And I appreciate that those are really difficult questions. So Lisa, can I ask you a version of the same question about sort of, do you think about, how do you think about, what do you want to tell us at Hopkins about this question about, I don't know, supporting the Beat or perhaps other things too?
I don't know. I mean, there are people, I think when you are Black, you have to figure out how to separate loyalties. So obviously always a big supporter and admirer of you. We have a mutual friend, Dr. Jessica Jones, who does amazing work. There are people at Hopkins that are doing great work. The entity as a whole has been awful for Black people in Baltimore City. I'm glad that somebody in the comments mentioned the police force, because with the money that they have not had to pay in taxes and the power and the access and all of that they've been able to acquire, they've used that to basically buy politicians and push this police force legislation through. They put it on a hiatus after the death of George Floyd, and people were out in the streets protesting. I think with the assumption, which seems to be playing out, that people would kind of let it go in a few years, and now it's coming back. So in all the city the city of Baltimore is a power entity, and Hopkins University as another power entity kind of collude to maintain what used to happen. So we can talk about the way that, in the past, these things that were bad, but most of those things are really still continuing today with a different face on them. So if Hopkins was to come and say that they wanted to give me $1 million, all money is not good money. And that would probably take way longer types of conversations than I had with Adam's family.
Thank you for that. And the question that you were referring to, how does Hopkins reconcile resuming its private police force, given all the amazing Hard History Project has uncovered about Hopkins' complicity in systemic racism from its founding to the present? I want to say, so this is partly a question for me, and I follow us on the Substack where I get to think out loud about a lot of these questions, please. But it's to say, I don't think those things are reconciled at all, right? I think that both things are true, or I hope both things are true, that we can do the work we do at Hard Histories, striving for integrity in every sense. And it can also be true that we are embedded in an institution that, as most folks on this call certainly know, has recommitted and has launched a private police force, despite criticism from within and without. And I think both of those things can be true, even if they certainly should not be. So I've got one more question, and so let me ask you both just briefly to comment on this. It goes, I was wondering if the panelists maybe give some critique on arguments against reparations, based on the idea that it's counterproductive to coalition building, which might undermine efforts of the lower socio and economic class to increase income distribution and even eventually wealth distribution. There's a comment here. I think some have argued that the fight for reparations is in some way perpetuating the status quo of low quality of life for folks in the lowest socioeconomic class, which disproportionately include Black and Brown folks. So I should just own the fact that I think I've introduced the word reparations, or I've imposed it on this conversation, and perhaps you in fact wouldn't even adopt. You don't want to adopt that rubric, so I want to allow for that. But maybe let me ask Adam and then Lisa, and I think this might be our last question before I turn it back to Annabelle. So feel free to make sure we get to any other points you wanted to make, Adam.
Sure. I mean, without getting into too much a conversation of semantics and like purely academic, I certainly believe that in certain terms, I think that reparations are the responsibility of the state that perpetuated the system. And so that idea of a state fundamentally making it easier and making it just possible for people to have access to enough money, food, shelter, medicine, like however that happens, given that they were the ones who perpetuated a system that made that only possible for some. I think the burden primarily lies there. And I certainly think that I'm generally a both and type of person. So people who have proximity or access or agency over capital need to start redistributing that, because we can't just wait for the state to tax Johns Hopkins out of existence, right? That probably won't happen. So I think that, I think that community organizing as being a part of this, actually, this brings up something I've wanted to mention, because in terms of us, Lisa mentioned too, like no matter what was going to happen, the Holofceners were going to give money to somebody, right? So our like psychic connection was going to be a part of it. Our gesture, our agency, our paternalism was going to be a part of it. So we asked ourselves questions, or I was asking questions of like, well, how do we try and limit that as much as possible, right? The other things that we really thought about were creating a fund for particular geographic areas in Baltimore City that would create a democratically usable $1 million fund, right? So a community would have agency democratically to community organize around that, for which our family wouldn't have any say. If they wanted to throw $1 million block party, that would have been the community's prerogative. One of the reasons that I felt good about the Beat was the Beat had a version 1.0 that had community buy-in, that had clear community sort of democratically, just through their readership and through the people who are participating. It's something that we weren't creating a new organization, right? We weren't saying, oh, there's all these other orgs that we could potentially help. We were specifically saying this, Lisa was going to make the Beat happen one way or another. At some point in time, the opportunity was going to come. So by us saying, here's this money for this thing that should have been capitalized already, in a normal, not horrible world, it already would have been. So we can give this money in a way that hopefully isn't still saying the will of the Holofceners creates this policy, right? Creates this thing. And that's not easy to do in terms of trying to be very deliberate about wealth redistribution. Should be tied generally to community organizing. And there's always going to be a question of how many voices were left out of the wealth redistribution conversation and who wasn't. And I don't have a good answer to that, but I'm here for those difficult conversations and have been a part of them, all the way from City Hall to the street corner. So I appreciate that question, but I agree that it cannot be done. Any of this cannot be done without thoughtfulness.
Lisa, is reparations, was it the right word for me to use to frame this conversation? Is that how you think about this? Or maybe not, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if this, I think I tend, again, this is a little more academic for me. I'm a very, it's a little bit above my pay grade, so I'm gonna try. But I do think reparations is more like this country. And I think this is like a private kind of transfer of funds. So I don't think of that as reparations. I will say that, again, I'm taking baby steps here, so please forgive me. But this question, I get kind of a critique of capitalism, and then also the question of whether Black people need to be restored what they are owed. And I think that both of those things, again, like kind of how Adam said, there's both and, there's two different things happening. There is a critique of capitalism because capitalism always means that somebody has to be at the top and somebody else has to be at the bottom. But it's also true that this country owes Black people, and really whatever reparations they give us will never be enough. So I do think that Black people are owed. This is my very minor story about this, is that I'm from Annapolis, and my grandfather had a head for business, and he liked to buy property. Some of that property is actually still in my family, even though my grandfather has been gone for a long time. There were places in Annapolis that he was literally not allowed to buy. No, you're not buying that. You are a Black man. This is out of your hands. That's money that my family just doesn't have. Not because my grandfather couldn't buy it, not that he wasn't skilled enough to manage that property and, make money and continue to make money, but because of the color of his skin, that was the door that was shut to him. And like I said, that's a very minor thing because my grandfather was not killed. He was not, run out of town. But it's a way that I don't have access that another person that had the exact same, life as me, living in Annapolis at the same time as me had. That's something that needs to be restored. So I guess those are the two. I try to kind of separate those two things and answer them both.
It's a brilliant response. So we thank you. And it's a perfect note to end on. I want to thank you both. And I want to invite Annabelle to join us to wrap things up. We really appreciate you all being with us today. Hi, Annabelle.
Hey, I'm back. So thanks very much to Lisa Snowden, Adam Holofcener, and Martha Jones for this incredibly rich conversation. We're honored to have had you here and appreciate how your research and work shed light on the questions we are asking at the Hard Histories Project at Hopkins. And so for me, as a student of the histories of science and medicine, as well as a student of biology, this discussion has been very illuminating and especially relevant to the questions I contend with in my coursework. In listening to this discussion about the Beat and its beginnings, it becomes clear how important the framing and proper dissemination of facts and information are. Lisa's words also paint a picture for us of how critical diversity and representation in creative spaces and in the media are in the process of decolonizing those spaces, and especially in journalism. And moreover, by becoming aware of becoming aware of and having discussions about histories and the issues facing us today, we can prepare to make next steps in combating racism and discrimination within our communities. Awareness and recognition help us to answer Professor Jones's earlier question of what does it look like when we get beyond the reckoning. For instance, as Adam discussed, we can think of how to change our behavior and how people in places of privilege or wealth can do work to benefit victims of structural or systemic racism, as well as racialized capitalism. While this was a relatively brief discussion in the scope of things, it was about an hour. Today, we have delved into the significance of the, arts in furthering our understandings of justice, race, and equity. So we'd all like to give thanks to our audience as well for watching and for sending in your great questions, and to the team at the SNF Agora Institute for their support for this event. And lastly, during these conversations, we have the chance to share what we're reading. We're also interested in what you're reading. What sources have helped you to better understand the hard questions we are asking at the Hard Histories Project? Share them with us and help build our collective Hard Histories bibliography. Let other members of the Hopkins and Baltimore community know about those books and articles that are helping you sort through the history of enslavement and more. You can reach us on social media with the hashtag JHUHardHistories or at our email address, hardhistories@jhu.edu. We are looking forward to hearing from you and learning from you too. You can learn more about Hard Histories at Hopkins at hardhistory.jhu.edu. Additional information about our event series, as well as YouTube videos of our past events, is posted at snfagora.jhu.edu/event. Please also subscribe to our Substack at hardhistoriesjhu.substack.com, where we regularly post updates about what we're up to. And thank you, and have a great rest of your day.